Hi everyone, my name is Ian Tan, uh, also known as Guitar Pug on Instagram. Um, this video is a demonstration of how I'm going to edit these three photos here, which was taken at the Bright Festival of Photography. Um, on Saturday and on Sunday, I held a cosplay uh, workshop featuring characters from The Witcher, which you can see here. We've got um, Moving Castles, or MK, as Geralt, and Emerald Cosplay as Ciri. So what I want to do is just to supplement the workshops that I've done by showing you how I edit these images once I've captured them, because I believe that to really bring out the potential of your images and to tell the story and to reinforce, the storytelling aspect of it, editing is really essential. So um, let me just talk briefly about the process that I go through when I edit my photos, and then we'll jump straight into it. So generally, the process that I use whenever I edit a photo is firstly to look at the photo, which is pretty obvious because you want to assess before you even start, playing with the sliders and doing things. ha- Just take about 5-10 seconds, sit back, look at the photo, and go through the process of what is the story am I trying to tell with this image? What exactly do I want to achieve? What's the end result? Um, and what are some of the issues or some of the things that need to be changed, adjusted, cleaned up, tweaked, etc., to the image, um, just so that it gives you a plan of attack and you're not really going into it blind and doing that spray and pray. It's the camera equivalent of spray and pray, where you're just changing a bunch of things hoping it'll turn out good. Um, and that's fine if you're learning and if you're beginning or experimenting, and I started out doing that, and you learn a lot doing that. But once you more or less know your way around how to manipulate an image, the next step in that development is really to be very intentional about your edits and where you want to take them. Firstly, because every time you do that, you're exercising your creative decision making skills, and that sharpens your photography growth, right? It makes you just more aware of what you're looking at, what you're looking for, what are some of the things that you really don't want in your images. Um, yeah, all those things go toward making your images really stand out and pop out. And really, for me personally, it's about quality, not quantity. I would rather put out 3 to 5 images that are of outstanding quality than 50 images that are so-so quality, with maybe a few in there that are really good. So particularly when you come to a point where you're shooting a lot, and you really have no shortage of images to choose from. I think this next step of being really critical, being very intentional about your photography and how you approach things is critical. Okay, so back to the process. After looking at your image and assessing what you want to do with it, um, let's start with this image here with Crystal as Siri. Now, Adobe, if you use, and this is all Adobe Lightroom, so if you use Lightroom, I've more or less quite used to the way they've laid things out here. So I typically work my way down through these sections here, from the basic down to color mixer, color grading, etc. I don't use all of them, so um, whichever way that you use is fine. There are many ways to skin a cat, so whichever way that you're used to and whichever way that gets you to the end result the quickest, do that. All right. So typically, I would start with the basic adjustments panel usually, because I want to balance out exposure, fix contrast, do some uh, minor adjustment, and make sure that your highlights and your shadows are recovered to the point that you're happy with. And I do this, really quick. I don't spend a lot of time on this. It's just to get your image, 50% of the way there. And then next, I'll jump into color correction. And again, I don't spend much time on this. Um, because cosplay isn't usually very critical to have accurate colors because I use colors in my cosplay editing to evoke emotions or feelings or to tell a story. So it's not about being color correct. You do it depends on the character really. For example, if you're shooting say Superman, with his red cape and all that, then obviously you don't change the colors so his cape appears orange. That doesn't quite look right. But for example, here with Ciri, as you can see, most of her colors are very earthy. You've got browns, you've got beiges, you've got some yellows and golds. So um, as the colors, I'm not going to change those colors dramatically anyway, but they don't have to be 100% accurate. So in terms of white balance, I'll often play around with the white balance. I'll test it to see what daylight setting looks like, what the shade setting looks like, what the other different settings, or even sometimes just custom adjusting the temperature and tint myself. But yeah, I don't spend too much time on that just to get myself most of the way there. Then next, I will probably move down to the color mixer and color grading. So after the color correction, which is your white balance, I'll move into the color grade, and this is where I start to apply a little bit more and play around with a bit more of the colors to bring them into harmony. Um, because with colors, they can really focus and reinforce the story that you're trying to tell or bring some cohesion to your image. So if you Google things like color theory, you'll often come across the terms like complementary colors or analogous colors or monochromatic colors. So I try and use these if I can in my image to just strengthen the image and to make the story that I want to tell more apparent. And it can also help you evoke a certain emotion or feeling. So, if you want it to feel cold, dark, you tend to veer more towards the blues. And if you want it to appear really warm and bright, you tend to veer more towards the yellows and the oranges and the reds. So, understanding how these colors can impact or even slightly enhance your photos will really help you. Okay, so let's jump straight into this image and edit it. So let's do a quick assessment. I've imported, and this is a raw file, which I've converted to DNG. So it's Adobe's proprietary raw. You can see all the EXIF information there. That's fine. Typically, I just go in and make sure that things are sharp when deciding to cull my images, whether I keep them or not. So everything here is fine from a technical perspective. Um, in terms of the camera profile, now I shoot with a Fujifilm GFX, so the actual RAW file itself will have one of Fujifilm's simulations. So if you're using a Fujifilm camera, I normally start with an Eterna simply because it's a very flat and neutral film simulation to use. But I recognize that not everyone on the workshop will shoot Fuji, so that's fine. So what I'll do is I'll start with the Adobe Color camera profile. And again, it may not be exactly the same way if you have a different camera and you choose Adobe, but um, it's that yeah, there's not much I can do to control that. But hopefully Adobe Color is close enough for most of us that we can sort of use it as a general starting point. Okay, so I'll start with the Adobe um, color profile. And firstly, just looking at image, okay, the contrast in there is fine. Um, there is a very slight greenish tinge, a very light green tinge, which I'm not really feeling. So I'd like to push it from an intention perspective. I'd like this to be a shot of her at the end of the day, kind of when the sun's starting to get low. She's here waiting for Geralt at the end of a long day. I also want it to be more of an intimate shot, so we're getting a little bit of a glimpse into Ciri, who can be a warrior princess and really headstrong. But here, I think we're catching her at the time where she's let her guard down slightly. So I want a little bit of a little bit more shadows, a little bit more contrast, and hopefully if I can turn some of this light into golden light, that would be ideal. Okay, so that's my game plan. So the greenish tinge, I'll fix that. There are some distracting elements that I probably would remove. Firstly, the flyaway hairs over here. Um, cosplay wigs are, cosplayers spend hours combing their wigs, fashioning it, putting it all in place. But things like when they move around, when they transport the wigs in the car, when there's lots of wind blowing, you will get flyaway hairs. It's wigs don't really behave like normal hair does, so often you'll get shapes like this which you don't see in normal hair. So here it's really obvious because the light's obviously making it jump out at us. So I will jump into Photoshop to fix that. But if it's a really simple thing, you could use the remove tool here in Lightroom as well. That works quite well. So I'll fix those flyaway hairs. I also want to fix this strand of hair coming across her eye. I know when we're looking at it from a normal crop, it's not that obvious, but I tend to go in and fix it if I can see it and it's an easy fix. Then I'll do it simply because sometimes my cosplayers will request for a photo to be submitted to be included in a magazine for print. So if I fix that, then it's not something that I'll have to worry about down the track. I can just be confident that the photos I've given them are print ready, and they can just run with that. Apart from that, not too many other issues. That there is a small minor spot here on this, which you can sort of see from here as a white dot. So I might just clean that up because that's easy. And oh yes, the I can see a bra strap here. So um, I, I, if you're really not sure, just check with the cosplayer saying, "Hey, are you happy for me to remove this, or do you want me to keep it in?" But I suspect that should be hidden normally under the shirt, and it's just because when cosplayers move around, they don't always stop and check. So that's fine. That's an easy fix. I can remove that. Um, Depending on the makeup of the character as well, I may consider retouching the face. So if you zoom in, you'll see that the face looks patchy, etc. However, with this character, I specifically asked the cosplayers to introduce some grime, some grit into their makeup to make it look as if they've been traveling for days and they're all dirty and grimy. Maybe they've come after a battle, so they don't have to appear pristine like a princess. So in this case, I'm going to leave it. But if let's say she was cosplaying a Disney princess, for example, and typically they have flawless skin, and so I would maybe retouch it to to be true to that character. Some cosplayers like their lines removed as well. Often I'll remove things that are non-permanent. So if they've got like a big zit, some acne, that sort of stuff, I'll remove that. Or redness in the skin because it's really hot, I'll remove that as well. But things like moles, stuff that's permanent and intrinsic to them as a person, I'll normally leave it in unless they want me to remove it. Again, it's always a very good idea to communicate with your cosplayer, and yeah, just have a conversation. Hey, look, um, tell me what you want me to keep in or remove. Um, Otherwise, if you want to leave it up to me, that's fine too. So just have that conversation. All right. So we've established that okay, we want to fix the color, we want to remove some of the distracting elements, and we just want to edit it so that the contrast sits a little bit more. It's a bit more balanced. Okay, so let's start with the exposure. So I'd move the exposure around, but typically I think the original exposure looks okay. If anything, maybe I might drop it slightly. But again, this is something that I'll often, once I get to the end of the process, I'll come back and just tweak things again. So we'll just have a go. So exposure is fine. The one thing I want to fix is just this color. So that's kind of like bugging me at the moment. So what I'll do is I'll change the white balance to, I don't think daylight will work because this is pretty close to daylight. So if I click on daylight, yeah, you can see it's even a little bit more green because of the w- the reflection of the light from the grass. You can see it's giving a green hue to the hair, even a little bit of the skin, which to me doesn't look. It makes it look pallid, all right? So I'm going to change it up. So let's go to usually when you want to warm something up, you'd go to shade or cloudy. So if I check on shade, yeah, see that's looking a little bit better in that. Um, it's starting to get the feel that I want. So I wanted something closer towards the end of the day. I want the light to look a little bit more golden and warm. So all right, so this is a good starting point from a white balance perspective. If anything, I might again, it's still looking a touch green. You can see there's a light green hue in that area there. So I'll just push the tint over across slightly to magenta, and again, that probably looks good. I might pull back on the the temperature slightly to make it cooler. Um, about there. Okay, so that's a good starting point. Fine, let's move on. Um, one thing I try to do is often I find straight out of the camera the contrast settings are a little harsh, so I tend to reduce the contrast a little bit, and which is why when I shoot with Fujifilm using the film simulations, I'd use Eterna because it starts off really flat, and I like that. But there are many ways to get to the same end result, so I'll just slightly drop the contrast. In terms of the highlights, I normally like to pull it back slightly, but in this case, when you pull it back, if you notice you lose the rim light because of the backlight from there. So I don't want to do that. So I will keep that where it is. Um, in terms of the shadows, now I don't want to push the shadows up because it makes everything look flat. See, she loses dimensionality here where there used to be shadows. So I will leave the shadows where they are. In terms of whites, I, the main thing with the whites and blacks is I use it to make sure that I don't blow out, uh, or if it's slightly blown on the darks and the lights, I'll try and recover some of it back there. So if you click and hold the white slider, and you hold down the option key, if you're using the Mac, you can see from the white parts which are the parts that are actually blown out, and if you pull it back, assuming you can actually recover it, it will sort of reduce a little bit. But in this case, I'm okay with those parts being slightly blown out because I would expect that to be blown out because it's receiving the full brunt of the light. And this part, it'll actually frame her quite nicely. So I'll leave that there. That's fine. It's not like her face is totally blown out or anything like that. And for the blacks, I'm fine. There's nothing there that needs to be totally black. So if you pull down on the blacks, you can see things that starting to lose detail around the gloves, which we don't want. So let's reset that back to what it was, and you can see all that detail there. That's fine. I don't touch clarity, texture, or dehaze. I save this for the end when I'm sharpening. Okay, so we'll come back to this area. Now, I do affect vibrance and saturation a lot, so because they touch on color, right? So um, what I normally do is when I'm affecting this, I pay attention to skin. I always want my character's skin tone to, if they're human, to look natural. Okay, and she's human, so I want it to look natural. Um, for those of you who don't know what the difference is between vibrance and saturation, saturation boosts everything, every single color that you see here. If you boost that, everything gets more saturated. And similarly, if you pull back, everything gets more desaturated until it becomes black and white, right? Vibrance, on the other hand, it does boost the colors, but it tends to preserve the skin tones. So things like the greens, etc., reds, blues, all that sort of stuff will get boosted when you move vibrance, but it that tends to leave the skin tones. It doesn't affect it as much. It will if you go extremely, but it doesn't. So if you look at it, I'll push that. I'm sort of almost halfway to the end, and her skin still looks reasonable, but you can see the greens and everything else is just way off the charts, right? So here's what I typically do. If I want to boost the colors a lot, I will tend to push up the vibrance, and then I'll just pull the saturation down slightly. So this really helps if the character has like red patches in the skin, things like that. I find it if you pull back on the saturation just slightly, it it tends to settle that down on the skin and it makes it look better. So that's just a little thing for me. I think the vibrance is probably a little bit too strong, so I'm going to pull that back a little. Okay, that's fine. All right, so it's not too different from the originals, but again, it's not meant to. If your original capture is pretty good already, then you shouldn't have to tweak it too much. So if I click that, you can see that really the biggest difference is the white balance, all right, that we've made. It's gone from being pretty cold, a little bit green, to something that's a bit warmer and more inviting. All right, cool. I'm happy with that. Let's move on to the color mixer. Now, color mixer is where we can start to have some real fun. Okay, I typically start with if let me give you a quick rundown of color mixer. So uh, colors are broken down into these things that affect it. So firstly, hue. Hue is basically the type of color, right? Is whether your reds are tend to veer towards almost like a purple, or whether it would veer more towards the orange. Um, Saturation is the strength of the color. So if you want your reds to become really red, or whether you want your reds to be not so red. And luminance is the brightness of the color. So for example, what's the most we can see here? All right, so we can see a lot of green in here. So let's play with the green. If we move the green hue towards blue, you can start to see the grass move away from yellow. All right, on this side it's yellow. As we scroll across to the other side, it doesn't become totally aqua, but it 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 moves more towards that end. So um, I won't play with the green too much. I might move that back towards yellow. I'll move the yellow towards orange because I want the light to be golden like sunset, right? So I'm going to move that back, and yeah, see that's looking really golden. And even with the orange, now if I move that all the way, it becomes orange is typically where skin tones reside. So you'll see orange affects her skin horribly, and she's gone from Ciri to becoming She-Hulk. So that's probably not what we want. Um, so I'll leave the orange alone, but the yellows moving it towards orange, not too much. You can see that again, it's affecting her skin tones in a very bad way. So often when I'm moving this, unless I'm confident it won't affect the skin tones too much, I'll tend to try and be a bit more. I tend to go a little bit easier on that. Um, Greens you can move a lot because there isn't usually green in a person's face, um, unless there's that green hue which we already got rid of. So that's fine. But I'm looking now. I'm still keeping an eye on the skin tones, but I'm looking more now on the foliage and the grass to see what the greens does. Okay, now that's good. All right, I'll leave that there for now. Um, what I'll do is I want even though the yellows are starting to turn golden, I still want them to be even more prominent. So I'll try boosting the saturation on the yellows. You can see that if I boost it totally, everything that's got some sort of yellow in it is going to be crazy, even her hair. So that's definitely not a good idea. But maybe just a slight boost. A slight boost will be fine. The oranges, yeah, that's the skin tones again. So if I desaturate the orange, it looks blue, but it's basically black and white. So we'll leave that alone. And I'm happy with the brightness levels of everything, so I won't touch the luminance. Okay, so that's the color mixer. Now, color grading. All right, now color grading is typically pretty simple. What this does is it allows you to shift the colors in the shadow region, the midtones, or the highlights. Okay, so for example, if we play with the shadow region, if I shift a lot of red into the shadow region, you can see that the parts that are affected the most by the reds are the shadowy parts. So the trees, this her whole area here because she's in the shadow, this part of the trees, those part of the trees, right? Um, and if so with this wheel, as you move this small circle further out to the edge, it becomes more saturated. So in a sense, you can see these numbers here. The H is for hue. So 345 is the color of the numerical value of the red. S is the 100 for the saturation. So we're at 100% saturation, hence why everything looks red. And then the luminance is the brightness. So luminance is controlled by the slider here, the luminance of the shadows. So if I push this slider up, it's going to brighten all the shadow areas. And similarly, if I drop the luminance, it's going to darken all the shadow areas. Okay, so typically with the color grading panel, what I normally do is I introduce either a bit of blue or cyan into the shadows, simply because um, even though when you look out in the real world, usually you don't see a lot of color in shadows, but typically people associate shadow colored with blue. And if you look in cinema, in film, um, the blackest blacks will be black, but above those, within the shadows and the midtones, you normally see a slight hint of color, and it's typically blue because the theory is that um, cool colors like blue will recede into the background when you look at an image, and warm colors like red, orange, yellows will advance, will come towards you and pop out when you're looking at an image. So the the what I want to do is I want to put some coolness into the shadows so that they create some depth, and then I want to bring out and that will in turn bring out the warm colors on her face, on her outfit, and that creates a little bit of separation from her and the background. So I'll show you what I mean. So what I'll do is I'll pop a little bit of blue. Now, as you notice, you'll notice her face because she's standing in shadow. Her face will get a blue tinge, right? So I'm going to back out from there a little bit. But what I'm looking at in terms of like where I want the color to affect is the shadows in the trees, but also keeping an eye out on the shadows on her, right? So I want there to be I want to get to a point with the saturation where it's you're only starting to notice the blue. Okay, you're starting to notice the blue, but it's not affecting her the rest of the skin tones too much. And then what I'll do is I'll use the balance. So balance affects how much of the blue comes through, or how much of it does not come through. So if I push it all the way here, you can see that the blue starts to recede. It's still in the shadow slightly, but it's starting to recede more from the face. Whereas if I push it the other way, you can see that the blue starts to take over everything, right? So, so typically what I'll do is I will get to a close point using the wheel, and then I'll use the balance to just nudge the blues out of the skin to a point where I'm happy with. So I don't want it to totally lose the blue in the skin, in the shadows of the skin. So I'll bring it back to about here. Again, it's very subtle, but when you're editing, it's not about making one big change that solves everything. You're building up layers of changes to get to the end result. So that's why the individual changes itself don't look very dramatic, but at the compound effect of all these different changes we're making will have a big image, a big difference on the image. Now, this blend slider affects the balance of that between the shadows and the midtones. So if I move the blend slider this way, you'll get a little bit of blues bleeding into the midtones. But if I move it this way, you'll get it'll push the blues out of the midtones. So you'll still see blue here, but not so much on the face. So typically I will push this about that much, and balance affects the balance between the blues and the shadows versus the highlights. So that's why um, that changed as well. Okay, so now when I play with this, I normally will say, okay, I've done the blues, but I need a little bit more orange back. So this is where I would jump back to the basic temperature, and then I'd push the temperature up a little bit to get a bit more warmth, and then I'd come back down and see if I can push a bit more blue into it. Okay, that's fine. All right, so the image is pretty close to how I want it to look. And I think it's slightly brighter here than I would like, and maybe on the edges as well. So that's fine. We can fix that with a vignette. All right, so um, now we were color grading. I'll skip detail for now because that's sharpening. I'll deal with sharpening at the end. Um, I don't worry about lens corrections. I don't worry about transform unless you're going to do funny things with the crop, um, etc. Um, I don't touch lens blur at all, but under effects, you'll have your vignette. Okay, I typically use a vignette to bring the viewer's attention towards the center of the frame. So given that she's mostly in the center, particularly the face, what I'll do is you'll see the effect of the vignette. As I introduce more of a vignette, the edges darken. Okay, the edges darken. And what that does is because the eye of the viewer is drawn naturally to the brightest parts of the image, Um, this just helps to reinforce that. Because if your edges are bright, then you look at that. The eye goes to that. It goes, oh, all right. And it's a distraction because you don't want the eye to go here or here. You want the eye to go here. So this is it without the vignette. And then I'll slowly bring it in. Now, if it gets to the point where it's obvious, people can obviously see a vignette, I think that's when you've gone too far. So I'll pull that back a little bit about there. So usually I find vignettes between 10 and -10 and -15 is roughly where I usually settle on. Sometimes I make it really extreme and go to 20, but it depends on the image. In this case, I don't want it to be very, very extreme, so I'll keep it around 11 or 12 or 10 is fine. Okay, and then you can affect other things about the vignette, like the midpoint, the roundness of the vignette, the feathering, how much it falls off. So if you think you want a stronger vignette, but you don't want it to be, you can obviously see the harsh cut off at a diagonal here. So you can use the feather to roll that off so it's a bit more gradual. It's not such a harsh and obvious vignette. So that's another way you could do it if you wanted to go more aggressive on your vignette. But what I'll do is I'll pull that back to about 15, and then maybe I'll pull the feather back about halfway, about there. And okay, now the other thing about the vignette also is that even though it doesn't really affect the overall exposure, I think the illusion on our eyes makes it look like as if our image has darkened. So there are times when after I apply the vignette, okay, I might maybe just boost the exposure a little bit just to give the image back a bit of life. Okay, that looks all right. Now the last chain, oh, I think I've probably gone a bit too far. So because I'm looking at this shadow here, I don't want to lose that shadow. So pull it back to about 0.5. Okay, and now the last bit is uh, I want to bring more focus to her face, because she is standing in a shadow and it's only her back and this edge of her shoulder that's receiving the brunt of the light. Um, I want just a little bit more light on the face. So what I'll do is I'll click on this button here to add a mask, and I'll just add a brush, a very simple brush. And with this brush, I'm going to brush on uh, 0.2 of a stop of exposure. So you can see the size of my brush here. I'm making it about the size of the face, roughly. And I'm just going to brush once. Done. Maybe a little bit down here. Yeah. Okay. So now there's just a little bit more light on the face. Um, and that brings a bit more attention to the eyes, etc. All right. Now the last thing I will do is the sharpening. Okay. Now here's where I talk about sharpening. If I'm going to retouch a person's face, typically what I do is I will turn off the sharpening, I'll reduce it to 0, and then I will edit this file in Photoshop. And then once I've done editing the file, doing a denoise if you need to, that sort of stuff, and then I will then apply sharpening to the final file. But now while it's still not finished, I won't apply any sharpening yet. In fact, I did want to go into Photoshop to remove those hairs, so I'll do that. So I'll go edit in Adobe Photoshop. All right, so in Photoshop, what I'll do is I'll just create a blank layer. I'm going to use the remove tool. It's just amazing at what it does. I'm going to zoom into the image. And you can see my little brush here. So I'm just going to remove the hair. And this is just basically like coloring in a coloring book, just follow the lines. You can, if you've got a stylus or a tablet, this makes it very easy. I just use the mouse because I'm lazy and I'm used to it. But if you're a pen is definitely better from an ergonomics perspective. Now I don't fix all the flyaway hairs, just the ones that look unnatural. Maybe that one. Okay, now I do end that one because that human hair doesn't do that. And I'm happy to leave the rest. Now I do want to fix this one on the eye. So let me just say it never ceases to amaze me the amount of detail I can get from a 100 megapixel sensor that the GFX has. You can even see the wow. You can even see the veins in the eyes. Okay, now if let's say she had a pimple, I would remove that, but she doesn't. Maybe they're just these lines here, which you can, yeah. When it comes to retouching, you can go on for forever. It depends on how fussy you are. But given that she's all about the grime, about the 30 days of travel through the forest, etc., I think she looks amazing. Okay. What was the last? Oh yes, I did want to fix. I did want to fix the strap here. So let me just make my brush bigger. Okay, that's done. And lastly, there's a white dot here that looked like a bit of sensor dust, so I'll just remove that. Okay, back into full view. Everything looks pretty good. Happy with that. I'm going to save and close the file. That should take me back to Photoshop, to Lightroom. That's a downside of working with a 100 megapixel file. It can take a while for the computer to process it. %. Come on, you good thing. Okay, there we go. Back to Lightroom. Okay, I'm now working because I worked in Photoshop. It opened it as a new as a TIFF file, and then when I finish it, it would save that file. So it says a TIFF file now. So this is the final file. Okay, so here's where we've done our retouching. I'm just going to apply the sharpening. The default that Adobe applies is 40. I'm happy with 40. I don't like images that are overly sharp. Um, it yeah, it's a personal taste thing. There's no judgment if you like it. If you like your sharpening at 200, that's fine. But yeah, the cool thing I want to show you with the sharpening is this masking. All right. So at the moment, it's applying 40 sharpening to everything in the screen. Every pixel is getting sharpened at 40. I don't want that. I don't want to sharpen the background. I don't really want to sharpen the skin because that brings out all the blemishes. So I use the masking to restrict the sharpening to the edges. And the way you can see that is if you hold down the Option key while dragging this masking slider, you'll start to see where the sharpening gets applied. So the white bits is what's being sharpened. So normally I will pull it back until it disappears from the skin. Okay, so before it was everything was being sharpened, and then at this point you'll still see parts of the skin being sharpened, which is not good. So I pull it back again, but you don't want to go all the way too much to the end because then there's not much being sharpened, right? At this point, it's just the edge of the hair, maybe the edges of the belt, etc. So I pulled it a little bit, and I'm really looking at the eyes here with the sharpening. I pull it about that point, just when it's starting to appear like it's affecting the skin, but not quite. That's probably where I'd stop. Okay, and obviously the whiter the whiter areas, the more white it is, the more sharpening is applied, and the less white, the less sharpening is applied. So the belt is obviously getting sharpened a lot. Um, the eyes a little bit, but not as much as the belt. Okay, which is fine. So I've done the sharpening. Next, I'll go back to the basic. What I'll usually do is I'll add a touch of clarity. I don't like to over. I don't like to add too much clarity because again, look at what's happening to her skin down here when I push the clarity too far. Okay, it's she starts getting mustache, which isn't right. Crystal will not be happy with that. So typically, I want it. I find that about 10, around 10 is where I'd stop, but that's a personal tasting. If you like to go more, go for it. Now, texture is a little bit like clarity, but it tends to enhance fine detail. So, like the clothes, if you pay attention to the fabric, as you push up texture, you can see that really start to pop out, right? But the bad news is it also does that to skin. So if you have a look at the skin, If I pull that out, yeah, see all the pores, all the lines, everything starts coming through with texture. So, um, as with most things, in moderation is fine, but too much is no good. Okay, so we've done the clarity, the sharpening, etc. Um, Now, one last thing that I like, I will do sometimes if I want to really draw attention to things like the eyes or to really outline the contours of the face. Um, I will get I will use a brush, and with the brush, I can paint on some extra clarity and sharpness. All right, so this is where you saw that the belt was really sharp, but the face not as sharp. Sometimes, if you really want to bring that sharpness a little bit back to the face, you can. So I typically add something like 10, and then maybe just a touch of clarity, like another 10, and then just the tiniest bit of exposure, like zero point 0.1. Oh, sorry, 0.1. Yes, something like that, and I'll just paint the eyes. Yeah, and then just the contours like the nose going down to the chin right there. If you want, you can paint that on the sword as well. You can see it just makes the metal bits pop a lot more. You can do the buckles. I'd leave the belt because the belt was pretty sharp already. That those little details here. If you really want those metal bits to stand out, you can push the exposure up a touch or even more clarity, and you can sort of see that on the sword here as I push the clarity. But you can also see that happening to the face, right? So okay, so I'll just be a bit more judicious with that and go to 20.2. I think that's good. And lastly, I think we're almost there. So let's have a quick review, right? So I'll just create a snapshot for this. I'll call it uh, uh, end result. Okay, and then if I go back to the original shot, will it let me do that? Oh no, sorry. Uh, I'll have to do it in a different way because this is a separate file, isn't it? Okay, so the best way to do it is, right, if I go to here, which was the file that we were working on before we went to Photoshop. Okay, and if I did, where are we going? Okay, so that's the original shot. You can do a side by side there. So the before and the after. Right now, obviously, it took a lot longer because I was explaining things as we went along the way. But um, yeah, that probably would normally take me about 15-20 minutes to complete that edit. Um, and yeah, really folk. And this is again coming back to that thing where if you've got multiple images in that setting, um, if you've put a lot of work fine tuning your colors, your white balance, your exposure, everything, you can simply just right click and go develop settings, copy settings. You can copy all the adjustments that you've done and then paste it to a series of other photos. When you go, for example, right click, develop settings, you can go paste settings, and then that'll paste it over the next 5 or 6 photos that are all in a similar sort of lighting condition. And then you just go into those photos and just make minor tweaks to get it looking how you want. So that's a good way to speed up your workflow with multiple images. But I like really spending time on a hero image. One image that you, oh, that's the one. That's the one I want to print out. That's the one I want to frame, or that's the one I want to share on social media. Um, and then yeah, that's a good way to go about it. Okay, so that's the first edit. Let's jump into a different edit now. So this one was the scene where Geralt and Ciri are reunited. And the story here is that the world that they inhabit is a dangerous place, right? There are monsters, there are competing kingdoms with soldiers out, killing each other. Um, there are magicians, there are people after Ciri from other worlds who want her power. So there's a lot of danger. They're in constant fear of something happening to one another, and they finally have this moment where after a long period of journeying, particularly with Geralt, right? Geralt really is the one who's looking for her. He finally finds her, and then she finally finds him, and they reunite. So it's a real touching moment. Um, from an intention perspective, what I want to do is I want to portray the joy and the love that they have for one another. So this shaft, this area of light here, I want it to be warm. So golden light, warm temperature. But to reinforce that, what I want to do is I want to add some coolness. I want to bring some coolness to particularly the background. So some blues, and then that will make them pop out of the scene even more. Um, and lastly, I want to play with I also want to introduce a crop, a widescreen crop to make this really look cinematic. Okay. In terms of the assessment of issues, look, series face, the brightness here, though that's the brightest part of the image. So as far as I can tell from the histogram, nothing's blown. So if you want, you could take we could take down the brightness here a little bit because that does, even though that's not blown out, there is really isn't much detail there. So maybe you could reduce the highlights on those. So that's one thing we could do. The other thing is there is a big disparity in brightness between Geralt's face and Ciri's face. So while I don't want to make Geralt's face as bright as Ciri's face because he is, if you look at it, it is slightly behind Ciri's face, and I think a little bit of darkness suits Geralt as Geralt's character well. So, but I do want to brighten that up a little bit, just so that's not so much of a disparity. And the image is quite contrasty, and I want to reduce the contrast of it slightly. Um, if you look at images from cinema, usually they're not very contrasty. We may remember them being very contrasty because we view them in a darkened room usually, or our eyes have become used to watching a movie over a period of an hour or 2 hours. So our eyes become used to the contrast level. But um, typically, if you look at a screen grab from a film, they're not as contrasty as you think they are. So I want to reduce the contrast on that a little bit, just a slightly bit. Okay, so let's start with that. Again, I'm starting with Adobe Color. Now I did say I want to warm this up a little bit, so let's just there are a couple of ways to do it. So one easy way is just to push the temperature up, right? And then bang, that warms up everything. But doing that also warms up the background, right? And I said that we wanted to have the background cool, to have that cool and warm contrast. So let's put the temperature back to where it was. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a mask, and I'm going to apply a radial gradient. Okay, so a radial gradient is basically a circular brush, but it's basically just a static area that you're choosing. This inner area is the highest strength that will be the highest amount of impact that our adjustment will have, and then it sort of feathers off as you get towards the edge here. So you can adjust the main area of impact, and then you can also adjust the size of the feathering. So in this case, um, since we know that we do want this part to be warm, and this part here also to be warm where the light is touching it. So let me go back to the mask. I'm just going to make it a bit flatter and a bit wider. In fact, I might have to do two masks. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to make it on them. That's fine. The rest of the areas will be okay. Okay, that much will be fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to warm them up. Okay, so you can see that it's just this area that's being warmed up. Everything else still looks as it was, as per original. Now, I don't want to warm up to the point where they look jaundiced. That's not good. But just a slight touch, and we can always come back and adjust the temperature. So that's fine. I'm happy with that. And what we can do is we can then play with the balance between that mask we just have and the overall temperature. So if I drop the overall temperature now to be cool, obviously that makes them cool again, but then what I'll do is I'll just go back into the mask and warm them up a bit more. Okay, now you can see that warmth creeping in over there. All right, so um, what you can do is you can add, or you can use a subtract brush. So I'll use a subtract brush, and I'll just brush off that warmth. Okay, Now, there are some of you Lightroom experts, I can already hear you there going, hey, you can use a subject mask. And that's true. I could also use a subject mask, right? So let me show you that. So let me delete this mask. So we're back to where we were. Now, under the masking tools, you can do brush. We did radial gradient. You can also select subjects, right? So if we select the subject, um, Lightroom is smart enough to go, okay, these are your subjects, and I've masked them. And then you could also then add a brush and just brush in these areas where the light is, and just make those. Well, that works too. All right. So many ways to skin a cat, whichever way gets you there quicker and the easiest with the least fuss. Use that way. All right. Okay, so I've made them a little bit warmer. I think I've made the background a bit too cool. It looks like nighttime now, which doesn't seem right. So I'll just bring back a little bit of warmth in there. And okay, now in terms of exposure, like we said, I think there's a little bit too much highlight here. So I'm just going to add another brush to bring back some of the highlights. So I'll start with -10 and just over there, maybe pull back on the whites a touch as well. And then I will create another brush for Geralt's face. So it's a new mask, new brush, and I will just increase exposure. I'll try 0.25, and I'll just brush that on his face. Now, there is a color difference as well between Geralt because of the differences in the cosplayer's skin color and makeup color. Um, so you can correct that now since it's a common area to where we're brushing. It looks a bit too warm to me, so I'm going to drop it down and make it cooler. So the temperature is about -8. The other way you can also do is you can drop some saturation. So I'll drop the saturation to minus just a very tiny bit. And there we go. It doesn't have to be totally the same, but it's close enough to my eyes. So that's fine. All right. Now, looking through the scene also, I noticed that the color on Ciri's outfit is very strong. Um, I don't want it to be as saturated as that. So I'm going to pull back on the overall saturation. Okay, just a touch. But when I do that, you lose the color of the warmth of the sun on them. So I'm going to push up the vibrance on that, and just push back on the saturation a little bit. Actually, you know what? I'm going to drop the vibrance a touch, and I'm going to push up the saturation. Somewhere about there, yeah. Again, one of these things you could tweak forever in a day, and you go to sleep and you come back tomorrow and go, I need to work on that again. But for the purposes of this exercise, that'll do. Now, color mixer, I'm happy with the colors, so I'd like to keep the greens naturally as they are. The back of it is fine. I could use a little bit more color in the back, so maybe what I'll do is I will introduce. So where we had a subject mask, we can also have a mask for the background, okay? Which is basically the opposite of a subject. So if I select background, it's going to mask the background. Now, I don't want it to affect the ferns because I'm happy with the color and how it looks there. So I can do a subtract with a linear gradient. All right, so a linear gradient, I'm just basically going to click and drag the gradient to where I want. So red is what's going to be affected. Something like that will do. Okay, and then I want to bring back a bit of color in the background by increasing the saturation a bit. Okay, that looks more natural to me now. Right. I don't want to touch the color mixer. Let's go into color grading. So I'm going to introduce some blues into the shadows. And I find that tends to even out the colors. Without this, the colors, it looks a little bit messier. It looks a bit cleaner, more cohesive with the blues. So that's another reason why I do this. And then I'll just push this out of push the blues out of the highlights just to keep the face colors where they are. And then I will bring the blend down as well just to keep the blues out of the midtones. And that looks fine to me. Okay, now I don't need to do I don't think I need to do any retouching. You can if you want to, like you see this part here, and these hairs here, or the shadows of the hairs. If those bother you, by all means go and fix them. There's nothing wrong with Ciri's face. I mean, if you're really picky, you could see some lines here and some hair here which could be removed. Um, but everything else looks fine. And honestly, the the image is wide enough that I don't think it's noticeable, especially when you look at it on Facebook or Instagram. That's fine. All right. So in that case, I'm not going to put a vignette on it because it's the brightest part is already where our eye is going to be. Everything else, there's not too much to distract us from. I am going to brighten the image a little bit more. Now that's made them much brighter. So I will drop the highlights slightly. And then I'm going to just reintroduce a bit of contrast back into the image. So whenever you drop highlights or you increase shadows, it reduces contrast. So if you want to retain the contrast, you'll need to do those two steps. A bit more contrast. Now I'm just going to warm the image up a little bit more. Okay, I think we could probably use a little bit more blue, a little bit more green. The other thing is you can sort of play around. Sometimes you find that the green, a green or a cyan or a teal, sorry, would work better. Um, or sometimes you just want it blue because it tends to preserve the blacks. It doesn't affect the black too much. Um, but if let's say everything's green, there's a lot of green, so maybe a teal would be more harmonious. Um, and the other reason also why you have that blue, cool, and warm is that that's a complementary color scheme. So blue and yellow, orange, or gold is totally opposite each other on the color wheel. So we call that a complementary color scheme. So that's why it works. It's a very good tried and tested formula. You'll see it a lot in movies when the next time you watch like a modern movie, you'll see this orange and teal scheme happening quite a lot. So that's the reason why they do it because it's not, it just looks good. Okay, I'm happy with that. And the last thing I said I wanted to do was I wanted to crop it, do a wide angle crop because I want it to look cinematic. So I'm going to go into the crop tool, which is R. Now, traditional cinema is 2.35 to 1, but that's like a really thin, especially if you're going to pop it on Instagram. It doesn't always look the best. I probably wouldn't, typically I'd go 16:9. Also 16:9 looks really good on your phone when you turn it sideways, just FYI. But okay, now, when I do that, you can see that the angle of the grass sort of goes this way. And when you measure their posture against this line, maybe I should tilt them a little bit this way. Okay, well, maybe a bit too much. Here's one of those things. I'm really bad at judging the straightness of things. Okay, but that's close enough. All right. So that's that third shot. And maybe here's where you kind of work out whether you want to how closely you want to adhere to these the rule of thirds thing. I think that's close enough, but if you wanted, you could move that up a little bit and just have a bit more space up here for the image to breathe, because that gives you the sense of space that they've come together in this big, cold, dangerous world, and there's that pool of warmth that they found with each other. What a great story. Amazing. All right. So that's the second image. And now let's do this third image. This third image is Geralt training in a field or in the forest. Um, the intention that I want to bring here is that I want to make it feel like, again, like the first shot, like a sunset, because you can see the long shadows. It kind of has that golden light sort of time. I also want to bring out the intensity in Geralt's expression because he's in shadow. And he's facing away from the sun and it's backlit. So I'd like to just bring a bit of brightness back into the face just to draw the viewer's eye more here. And then I'd darken the edges as well, just to bring that focus back to the character. Okay. In terms of distractions, look, the face looks really clean. If you really wanted to be fussy, you can remove this circle of hair here that doesn't look natural. But everything else looks pretty good. You have these here. Um, if you are really, 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 really picky, you can remove the largest ones. like here, the largest ones here. Um, but I've found that sometimes when you remove one, it upsets the balance of things, and it I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I'll leave it up to your personal preference if you want to do it or not. But overall, I don't think there's any retouching we need to be done. Um, if in terms of distractions, I might remove this little black dot here. For some reason, my eye just goes there, uh, I'm just going to be lazy and use the Lightroom's remove tool. Click on that and remove, gone. Okay, that's easy done. I do want to even out the contrast, so there isn't. It's hard to see the detail here in Geralt's outfit because he's in shadow, but also the outfit is black and it's dark brown, dark black. That's hard to see anything. So I want to lift the shadows up a little bit. I want to bring down the highlights a little bit so that uh, the exposure is evened out a little bit more. And of course, I want to play with the colors to make it look like golden light. Okay, so that's the plan of attack. We've removed the distractions. We want to brighten the face, so I'm just going to use a brush. This should be pretty straightforward. I'll start with 0.36. Now, I'm not going to brush the whole face. I still want this side to be in shadow, because if I brighten the whole face, it looks a little bit flat, right? Um, so I'm going to, whoops, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to just brighten one half of the face, like so. Okay, so that looks a bit more three-dimensional to me because you've got a light and a dark. Okay, that's pretty cool. Um, Now, in terms of the color temperature, I want it to be warmer, so I'm going to warm up everything. That looks pretty cool. I am going to lift the shadows because I want to see some more and you can see the detail coming back in the outfit there. Okay. Now, as I lift the shadows, notice that the image it's starting to become really flat dynamically, right? This part is becoming almost as bright as this part, and I'm losing that 3D effect. So do be careful how much you lift your shadows. Again, matter of personal taste, but I think somewhere where you can just start to see and make out, that there's enough detail there, I'd stop. If you need to, you can reinforce that brightness again, maybe just a little bit. About that much maybe. Okay, so that's fine. All right. Now I do want to get that golden light feel, so I'm going to go to the color mixer and I'm going to play with the hues again. So I don't want the greens to be so green, so I'm going to move them towards yellow, like so, and I'm going to move the yellows towards orange, and there you go. It's starting to look golden. Brilliant. Okay, and I'll stop right there. I won't touch orange because that's going to affect Geralt's face, as you can see. Whoa, red Geralt. Geralt as Hulk. No. So leave the orange alone and move on. Great. And I'm pretty happy. So, and the other thing you'll notice also, the colors become more cohesive, right? So Geralt's outfit is there's a lot of leather, which is very warm. It's a very earthy feel. So having your colors more towards the reds, the orange, the yellows, it brings that earthiness, that color cohesion, and just strengthens your story. So okay, so color grading. Let's try pushing some blues into the shadows. Now when you do that, notice that it loses that warmth. So again, this is where you kind of push the shadows out of the highlights and push the shadows out of the midtones, and that brings it back. But that introduces a slight bluish tinge, and you can sort of massage that to, if you move it slightly towards away from blue and more towards teal, which has a touch of green in it, that again makes it more cohesive. And that is cool. All right. Now, one thing you can also do is um, if I see my blacks hitting the left side of the post, um, one thing you can also do is you can just lift the shadow area. So I look at this L number here, which is the luminance. So I'll lift it to about maybe 15 or 20, sometimes even more, depending on your taste. But um, I'll put it at 25. Okay. And what that does is you can see some of the detail coming back in the shadows. It also makes it look a little bit filmic because the graduations from your highlights to the shadows in film is very organic, right? It's not a very hard from black to gray to white. There are graduations in between, and it's a very subtle roll off. So I find that if you do things like this to ease the transitions from black to semi blacks to shadowy to your shadow midtones to your midtones, those little areas in between, it makes your image look have that cinematic look. um, so all right, so I've done that. And then lastly, yeah, I did say I wanted to put a vignette around this area just to bring it towards Geralt. So I will go to the effects panel. I will bring a vignette across, so about 15. And that's subtle enough that I can see the edges. They don't bother me so much. Ooh, I can see a little dot here. That's probably an insect or something, but it's sort of sticking out. It looks like I haven't cleaned my sensor, so I'm just going to use a brush to remove that. And done. Okay, so that looks pretty cool now. Um, since I'm not going to do any retouching, I'll jump straight into the sharpening of the detail. So I'm going to hold down the Option key as I drag the masking, and that's about where I want it to be. I'm fine having a little bit of detail being sharpened here. That's fine, particularly on a masculine character. Um, having skin blemishes come out makes them appear more masculine, whereas with a female character, it's the opposite, right? That you want the skin to look as nice as possible. But again, it depends on the characters. Ciri is a bit of a tomboy. She's not afraid of getting into rough and tumble spots. So having a bit of grit on her, it's fine too. But Geralt definitely is a rough character, so that looks fine. And lastly, I'm just going to add a touch of clarity just to now you can see what clarity does. If you look at the face while I pull the clarity slider, you can sort of see, it adds a bit of dimension to it. So, but if you go too far, it becomes very sharp, and you lose that organic feel that we had before. So this is why I'll push clarity to about 10, maybe 15, but I don't usually go much higher than that unless I specifically want it to look like that. Um, Okay, and that's done. Maybe I might just pull a bit more contrast just for that. And yep, and I think that's good. So how do I do it before and after? Okay, so that's the before, a bit green, a bit cold, a bit flat, and that's the after. Done. Okay, so those are the three edits we've done. I'll make that number 2. So if we look at that on the full screen, we've got Ciri, kind of like in the forest at the end of the day. I think maybe that it might be a little bit green, so let me just go back into there and just pull that back towards red. And I am going to drop the exposure a little bit. Okay. Okay, so we've got Ciri. Yeah, that's a much more cohesive color palette. So again, with her outfit, browns, beiges, kind of cream off whites, and now the forest is sort of has that golden tones which complements it really well. This is the reunion scene. They're such amazing performers. Okay, speaking of distractions, you can see Geralt's sword protruding from the back of his head here, as well as here. Now I know that's part of of the outfit, but sometimes when you look at it and you go, oh, that that draws my eye away from this moment. It's a distraction. So um, I would probably go into Photoshop and just remove that, and maybe this part as well. I mean, you can maybe leave this part. That's not too bad, but that definitely looks a bit weird. Even though we know it is because his sword is so big. If you draw a crucifix shape there, that's his sword. Um, but yeah, personal preference. If you're happy with it, just leave it. But if you want to remove it because it's a distraction, do that. And then lastly, Geralt training. Yep, that definitely looks like a sunset training scene. Very happy with that. Very intense um, look, which we've brought out with the brush to bring out that detail and that look there. So done. All right. So I hope that sheds some light and helps you um, with some new tools that you can use to tell your stories when you edit your images. Um, as I said during my workshop, uh, take whatever's of benefit to you and use that. And anything else you don't agree with or you find doesn't work for you, then just ignore it. So, and if this helps you in some way, please make use of it. And if it doesn't, then that's fine. And thank you for watching. All right, guys. Thank you again for all of you who attended my workshops. I really enjoyed working with you. I was so gratified to see everyone really grasp the assignments with both hands and really jump in and you know you didn't just stay in one place taking the same photo. You moved around. You got into other people's way, which is good because that shows that you're really trying to get the shot to tell that story. And we had time for it anyway, so that's fine. And also a huge thank you to our cosplayers, um, Megan, MK, and Crystal. And also a huge thank you to Fujifilm and Protog and Nanlite for supporting this workshop. And lastly, thank you to Matt, Nick, the BFOP organizing team, just for putting up such an amazing event and for having us along. You guys are amazing, and take care, guys.